Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar on making the most of the digital qual transformation and understanding how we can apply digital qualitative in the best practices and best ways to execute really great international research. I'm Tommy Stinson. I'm the director of Morrow Matchbox's Qualitative Center of Excellence and oversee all the qualitative work that we do here. And I'm joined by Liz Miller, VP of Business Development. We're going to have a fairly informal conversation today. We have a couple of topics to touch on. As we go, please be thoughtful of any questions you may have, and you can submit those questions in the window on your right, and Liz will be collecting those and we'll be answering questions after the conversation. So what I'd like to do is just start at a very high level with an introduction to Morrow Matchbox, and that's mostly to provide some context for what we'll be talking about and how we'll be going through some of the best practices around digital qualitative. So Morrow Matchbox, we are a tech-enabled advisory services company, and at the heart of everything that we do is an understanding that System 1 emotional connections, System 1 factors play a huge role, in fact, a disproportionate role in driving consumer behavior and consumer attitudes. So we talk about this, as you'll see on the screen here, is focusing on the intersections of behavior and emotion. And it's our really firm belief that historically market research and insights and advisory services companies have fallen short because we focus too much on asking people what they think or asking people about their attitudes. Which is, it completely ignores the sort of 90 to 95% of the influences of those behaviors and actions. So we, by focusing on that intersection, we talk about that as closing the gap between what people say they do or say they think and what they actually do or actually think. So we talk about this feel, behave, think circle, and everything that we do from a qualitative perspective, quantitative market research, from study design all the way through to insights delivery and strategic recommendations, is founded on understanding what are those System 1 emotional and unconscious factors that are influencing what we see people do in the behavior, and then influencing their rational attitudes or rational explanations of those behaviors. Our qualitative team especially is really well suited and focused on understanding cultural themes as a way to bring context to why people feel and behave and think the ways that they do. So we are a team, international team of social scientists, of anthropologists, of psychologists, sociologists, and we have a very firm belief that if we don't understand the cultural influences and the cultural themes that are driving the emotional connections that people have with brands, we're really painting a partial picture of what's happening, and we're unable to really understand why people are connecting the ways that they are with categories or with brands. And we look at that through dominant cultural themes, which are very prevalent and very easy to discern in the world around us, but also emerging cultural themes and sort of new conversations and new ways of interacting with brands. So this is just a quick snapshot of who we are, and happy to answer more questions after the session. But I think the key thing, and you'll see this woven throughout the conversation that Liz and I will be having, is that the System 1 factors that drive that behavior and those attitudes are massively important, particularly on an international scale. And when we start thinking about multi-market international research and how do we understand those System 1 emotional connections in one market as well as in another market, in one culture as well as in another culture, and how do we bring all of those things together to tell a coherent story. So with that, Liz, I don't know if anything that you would add to that, or we can jump into questions. What do you think?
I think we can jump in. I mean, I'm really happy to be having this conversation. I think with the massive shift to digital qual that we've seen this year, and that has just been really made to be a core necessity of our clients' research strategy, and we've really seen that across the industry. And so I think I was hoping to start with that context in mind, and the fact that you and I, we both have done enough work in the digital qual space during weird COVID times and during regular times to know that some of those projects go better than others, and that there are certain things that I think we've seen projects go well when there are certain sort of core practices and strategies in mind from the beginning. So I think at a high level, I'd like to just start with, what are those considerations? What do you think those foundational considerations should be especially for people new to digital qual, or where this is just becoming an increasingly important part of their overall strategy compared to what they maybe used to do?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I have seen it in the past. I don't know that we do this as much as the royal we, not we at More Matchbox, but
Yeah.
qualitative researchers do this, where I think digital qualitative has been a way to bypass local market involvement, because if you're not physically there, it's easier to say, well, we've got people who can speak that language here in New York or San Francisco or wherever we happen to be, Toronto, and so we really don't need to worry about having a local market partner, because the participants are going to complete these exercises on their own time anyway. If it's asynchronous, if it's in real time, then we'll just have to stay up late, late and do the interviews on whatever the participant's time zone is. And I think that what we know is that is a massive fallacy. So while I think the good news is that cultural values, human values, system one factors, again, that drive those behaviors are consistent across, right? Like people are people, and the ways that they make meaning of the world around them, the ways that they understand the dynamics between consumer and brand and product are often quite consistent. So that's the good news. The challenge for researchers, though, in setting up digital qualitative and thinking about how we do this well, is an understanding that you need somebody with a cultural understanding in that market who can help you understand how those values get filtered into responses and image collections and all the exercises that we ask people to do in the context of digital qualitative. If you don't understand the local market context, then you're not going to really be able to understand why people are participating or saying the things that they're saying, or offering the insights that they're offering. So to me, one of the biggest considerations is understanding that while, I mean, in my case, right, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of my clients are North American based, and they want to understand what's happening in China, or they want to understand what's happening in Mexico or in France and Germany. They want to understand what's happening out there without physically being there. I think what we have to remember is that it's not that the North American team is the team and we're sort of tossing things out to people in the local markets. We are all one team, right? And I think that that's one of the most important things that we can think about when conducting digital qualitative on an international scale, is that it's not that we're plugging and playing people in local markets. It's that we have to think about those local market partners, whether they're our colleagues, in Latin America or in the UK, or whether they're the trusted, we have sort of a cadre of really highly vetted, high quality custom partners in local markets. For the purposes of this engagement, we are the team. And that is hugely important, because if we don't do that, then not everybody's going to be on the same page. The study is not going to be set up well. What one moderator is asking is going to be different from what another moderator is asking, and you're going to wind up with a massively disjointed set of findings, and an inability to weave those findings together, I think, into insightful recommendations. Does it really? Sorry, then I'll shut up. A really good example came to mind. We were doing some work in Mexico and Brazil for a client who was thinking about launching a new product in Latin America. They're US based. They wanted to launch a new product there. And before they invested a bunch of R&D and innovation dollars in marketing, they really just kind of needed to understand, is there a there there? Like, is the market even interested in what we have to offer? And we have people who speak the language, those languages, speak Portuguese, speak Spanish in North America. We could easily have saved dollars and kept that here. But when we brought those team members from our Latin American offices into the conversation, they were able to say, well, yeah, you can ask it that way. We would recommend you do it this way. Or even as they were moderating, we were getting great feedback and great insight from the participants. They were able to say, well, what's interesting is why they're saying this is because culturally, we know that the unspoken assumptions that they're bringing to the table around this category are such and such, right? So having that really great team operating in really tight concert was really important to the success of that work. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm like, bleh.
Well, we jumped around. We got there, I think. I like what you said about kind of, thinking about those partners, and even in markets where we don't have, our own colleagues there, but we have really developed those deep local relationships, it's important to think of them as an extension of our team, in the same way that when we're working effectively and closely with clients, we want them to think of us as an extension of their team. And if they don't have local market presence, it's just, there's no time when it's more important than that to have really smart connections, really well vetted connections that are in market, that really, really know what's going on, especially if it's a new market of exploration, or a new product, or something that hasn't been tried before in that particular market. There's just so much, the stakes are high, and it's worth it to get it right. So one thing that you were talking about, you kind of started to touch on how we pull, how these considerations impact the ability to pull effective insights from the work. And I think I'd like to dig into that a little bit and talk about, how this all relates to analysis. So I think what we've seen, especially, in international projects where you have multiple markets, it can be really overwhelming, because you can end up with so much data, and you may not even speak the language, and you may, have a lot to kind of overcome. And, hopefully you're working with partners as a client. Hopefully you're working with partners so you can trust on that. But I think from an analysis perspective, what do you think clients need to keep in mind?
I think one of the worst things that we can do with international work is to go in without a really clear understanding of what we need to come out with. And I've seen this in the past, where we are doing a 5-market study and we think everybody's on the same page, and then at the end of the field work, we get 5 different top-line summaries, or we sit down and we debrief with each of the markets on exactly what are the themes that you've seen after you've gone through your analysis process, and we realize that each market's actually trying to answer very different questions. So I think from an analytical perspective, thinking about that beforehand, I mean, it's really, this is, again, not unique to digital. This is the same thing that we would be doing if we were going and sitting in the back room, or we were in an ethnography or something like that. But thinking through, what is the analytical frame that we're going to bring to this? How are we thinking about tagging and coding the data as it comes in? How are we briefing the partners up front? And this is where I think, to your point, that trusted partner network becomes so important, because if we start fresh with every study with a different partner, then you're building from ground zero every single time you start a study. And so over time, with the advisors and the trusted partners that we've worked with, we don't physically maybe speak the language, but we all speak the same language, right? Like, we know going in what our assumptions are about what good qualitative looks like, what good storytelling looks like, and what an insight, frankly, is to be defined as. So I think that's.
Well, I think
go ahead.
I think that's a good point, and I like that you mentioned how that relates, specifically to how we think about partners across the board too, because thankfully, I think we're at a good point in time where, maybe in the last 5-10 years, there's been kind of a collective shift in the market research and insights world that has really focused on outcome-oriented project design, outcome-oriented research. And so I like what you're saying about, aligning on what we want those outcomes to be. What do we want to learn from this, rather than just, we're studying this topic, or we're studying this segment. I think that's a really good point.
Well, and a huge shout out to Noelia and Sebastian and the other Maru Matchbox crew in Latin America, and to Angel and others in the UK, because I think the skills and the capabilities that they bring, they are part of our team. They are our team, right? So I think when we just internally, when we think about study design, we think about analysis approaches, analytical approaches, and outcomes, we are all on the same page. And then they also have, the nice thing about being a company our size is that we don't have huge overhead with, local employees in lots of different countries, and allows us the flexibility to be able to go to the people that we know and that they know in those markets, and just build on that relationship. So, I mean, it's interesting, because I think as a new researcher, if you had asked me about analysis, I might have said something different. I might have said something about analytical rigor or about something more process oriented. And the older I've gotten and the more experienced I've gotten, I think while that is obviously important and good research is table stakes, being able to speak that language and being able to have that cohesive team is just is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I want to pause here for a minute and just encourage the folks on this line. If you do have questions, it would be really great to go through those. So feel free to send them along. I think immediately I'd like to kind of ask you, Tommy, do you have an example that we could talk through as far as, kind of effective and impactful analysis that has come together through some of the localization and kind of cohesive practices you've described?
Yes, one engagement comes to mind when we were again looking at, this was actually a bottled water product that we were looking at positioning for in a number of different markets, but in Europe as well as Middle East and Asian markets. And I think brand and positioning studies are particularly challenging in this respect because there's so much wiggle room for what is positioning research and how do we interpret the sort of system one's insights or factors that come out of the research, and what does that mean for how the client needs to position themselves consistently on a global scale, but also relevantly on a local scale, if that makes sense. So I think that was an area where we had some positioning statements and some different reasons to believe and value proposition and things like that for the product. And I was quite nervous because it was complicated. I mean, water is a complicated category and it carries a lot of cultural meaning and cultural heft. But by having partners who, most of our partners do come from the brand world or the brand insight sort of agency insights, as well as market research. We were able to make sure that everyone was speaking the same language when it comes to how we position something and what does positioning feedback look like, and how do you avoid just taking somebody's statement in a group setting or in a asynchronous diary kind of thing, and how do you avoid treating that at face value? Because you always, for positioning especially, right, you always have to go deeper. You have to understand, well, what does this mean for how then the statement needs to change, or what does it mean for the local market willingness to accept this, and how do we make it relevant without diluting the global consistency that needs to be had?
Yeah, that's a good example, I think. So I have one follow-up question I want to make sure we get to here. So this question is about effectively managing multi-market projects.
So I
think the question here is that there have been situations where different markets take the research in different directions, and it's hard to develop a coherent story at the conclusion of the project. So do you have any recommendations? So this is kind of throughout the process. Do you have recommendations on how to avoid what you described before, right? Which is you end up with this splay of many different directions.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's probably calling me out for being a little bit too vague. Too vague. I concretely, I think what I've seen work best in those instances where you've already done the legwork to establish the really great partners. You've already assured had assurances that the team, whether it's internal colleagues like we have or local market partners, is operating as one team. Then I think it's actually the practical prospects of operating that way. So one thing that we typically do is identify a lead market, whether that's North America or someplace else. It's often someplace else. The research begins there, and then we make sure it's very important to stagger the field work and to have the local market representatives actually be present for that field work. So dialing in and listening or viewing the discussion boards as they're happening. I think the risk for all qual research and quantitative too, for that matter, is that analysis and fieldwork can sometimes be a bit of a black box where we sort of go silent for a while. And one of the things that we think is really important is making sure that we have opportunities to debrief along the way with our clients to make sure that, you know, as they have something to share with their stakeholders, we are gathering that feedback and it's affecting the fieldwork as it's continuing. So having local market partners be a part of those debriefs and actually hearing how the discussion is unfolding and how the research thus far is being received. So that's a huge one.
Yeah.
That also allows each market, I mean, to be able to know what to listen for, right? So if I've heard our UK colleagues moderating, and I know that an issue came up and it's something that the client's particularly interested in, I can be listening for that in the US as I'm moderating and know that that's an important relevant factor that we need to take into consideration. I think the other thing, just very quickly, is practically thinking through what's an analysis template and what's the outline of the deliverable. So analysis templates are tricky because they can be overly prescriptive and they can sort of pigeonhole analysis in a local market, and it can make it hard to say, like, well, yes, I know we have this template, we need to answer these questions, but there's this other thing out there that it doesn't fit in your analysis template. So understanding as one team how to handle that and how to make sure that there's flexibility and freedom to uncover things that are unexpected, of course, but making sure that the teams all know that as we go through analysis, we want to understand the following aspects of the questions that we've asked. I think that's a huge step towards minimizing the likelihood of coming out at the end of it with something that's completely disconnected and unable to be woven into some kind of a narrative.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. So I don't have any more questions in the chat.
That's good. I know we're almost out of time, so that works.
Yeah. So if anybody does have any follow-up questions or thoughts they'd like to share, of course, you can feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, I think that might be what we've got today.
That's awesome. I love doing these quickly and keeping it short and sweet. But yeah, to anyone on the line, please do feel free. My email is here. Liz is liz.miller@maramatchbox.com. So please do feel free to reach out with any further questions or discussions. And thank you very much, Liz. Thanks for the questions. This is this is a highlight of my day.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day. And be on the lookout for more Mara Matchbox webinars to come. So thanks everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.